A loving wife, blind and crippled, works hard to keep her family together, trusting her husband completely. But when he betrays her for a younger woman, it tears their family apart and puts them through unimaginable pain. As the truth slowly comes out, the family must find a way to heal and rebuild, even as the husband struggles with guilt and regret. Will they find forgiveness, or will the damage be too great to repair? This powerful story of betrayal, resilience, and redemption will keep you hooked until the very end. The morning sun filtered through the small, lace-curtained window of a modest home in Lagos, Nigeria. The air was filled with the aroma of fried plantains and steaming tea, a testament to Mary's determination to keep her family's routines intact despite her physical limitations. Mary, blind and confined to a wheelchair, was seated at the dining table, her hands expertly folding the freshly washed clothes. Her two children, Michael and Sarah, rushed around preparing for their day. Michael, 20, the eldest, was a university student juggling part-time jobs to support his studies. His ambition was as relentless as his drive to escape the cycle of poverty that had defined their family's life. Tall and broad-shouldered, he bore the quiet weight of responsibility, feeling it was his duty to shield his mother and younger sister from the harsh realities of their world. His sister Sarah, 18, was a senior in secondary school, bright-eyed and full of dreams. Unlike her brother, who wore his burdens like armor, Sarah approached life with optimism and an unwavering belief in their family's strength. Their father, John, sat at the head of the table, reading the morning newspaper. At 47, John was still strong and commanding, but the spark of passion in his marriage had dimmed over the years. He loved his family, or at least he thought he did, but the weight of responsibility and the monotony of their daily struggles had begun to wear on him. He often found himself reminiscing about the man he used to be, carefree, ambitious, and full of dreams. Somewhere along the line, life had become a series of sacrifices, and John wasn't sure he was willing to keep making them. As breakfast was served, the small family sat together. Mary's face lit up when Sarah described her upcoming school project, while Michael quietly ate, his mind preoccupied with looming exams and part-time shifts. John glanced around the table, observing his family but feeling disconnected. He noticed Mary's frail hands as she reached for her cup of tea, her movements steady despite her blindness. He felt a pang of guilt for the thoughts he'd been entertaining lately, thoughts of freedom, of excitement, of something more. "Michael," Mary said, breaking the silence, "have you thought about applying for that scholarship Pastor David mentioned? It could really help ease some of the financial pressure." Michael nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll look into it, Mama." His tone was clipped, a reflection of the internal frustration he carried. He hated that his family had to rely on others for support. Sarah, ever the peacemaker, chimed in. "We're going to be fine, Michael. One day, you'll graduate, and everything will change. We just have to keep believing." John listened to his daughter's words but felt detached from her optimism. He wanted to believe things would get better, but as he glanced out the window, his thoughts wandered. He remembered the days when he had big dreams of his own. Now, all he could see were the limitations of their reality, and he began to resent the sacrifices he had made. At breakfast, Mary asked Sarah to bring her sewing kit. Despite her disabilities, Mary was a skilled seamstress, earning a small income by repairing and tailoring clothes for neighbors. It wasn't much, but it allowed her to contribute to the household. As Sarah handed her the kit, Mary reached out and gently touched her daughter's face. "You've been quiet lately," Mary said, sensing the tension. "Is everything okay at school?" Sarah hesitated, then smiled. "Everything's fine, Mama. Don't worry about me." John stood abruptly, announcing he was heading to work. Mary called out after him, "Don't forget Pastor David is coming over later. He wants to discuss the church fundraiser." "I won't," John replied, though his voice lacked conviction. He left the house, feeling a growing restlessness that he couldn't explain. When Pastor David arrived later that afternoon, his presence filled the room with warmth and calm. A man in his late 50s, he had been a pillar of support for Mary since her disability worsened. As they spoke, Mary confided in him about her worries for John. "He seems distant," she admitted, her hands fidgeting with the fabric she was sewing. "Marriage isn't easy," Pastor David replied gently. But you've faced bigger challenges before, Mary. Trust in your strength and in God's plan. Mary nodded, though a shadow of doubt flickered across her face. Unbeknownst to her, John had begun to entertain thoughts that would soon test the very foundation of their family. As the day faded into evening, the fragile balance of their home remained intact, but change was looming. Just beyond the horizon, John's restlessness grew like a storm brewing on the horizon. His once contented life began to feel stifling, a series of monotonous routines that drained him of joy. He found himself leaving the house earlier and staying out later, seeking solace in the hum of the city. It was during one of these escapades that he met Ella. She worked at a small cafe near his office, serving coffee with a radiant smile that made her stand out. At 27, Ella was the epitome of youth and vibrancy, with a captivating beauty that turned heads. Her laughter was infectious, her eyes sparkled with mischief, and she exuded a confidence that was magnetic. John first noticed her when she leaned over the counter to serve him a coffee, her charm effortlessly pulling him into conversation. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice light and teasing. John, caught off guard by her attention, chuckled. "Something like that. Just the usual grind." "Well, coffee won't solve all your problems, but it's a start," she said, her smile widening. That simple exchange became the first of many. John found reasons to visit the cafe more frequently, lingering longer each time. Ella was attentive, listening to his frustrations about work and life. She made him feel heard in a way he hadn't felt in years. The subtle way she brushed her hair behind her ear, or leaned closer when he spoke, began to stir something within him. Ella wasn't oblivious to the effect she had on John. She saw his vulnerability and seized the opportunity. She subtly dropped hints about her struggles, her dreams of finishing college, the financial burdens holding her back, and the lack of support in her life. John, yearning to feel needed and admired, found himself wanting to help her. "I'm just trying to make ends meet," Ella confided one afternoon, her voice soft and tinged with sadness. "I had to drop out of school because I couldn't afford the fees. Sometimes it feels like I'll never get ahead." John felt a pang of sympathy. "That's tough, Ella. You're smart and hardworking. You deserve better." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "You really think so?" In that moment, John's heart swelled with a mix of pride and protectiveness. He began to view Ella as a symbol of everything he thought he had lost: youth, excitement, and the promise of a better future. Meanwhile, at home, Mary started noticing the cracks in their family dynamic. John's absences became more frequent, his excuses less convincing. Sarah, ever perceptive, brought her concerns to Michael. "Something's not right with Dad," she said one evening as they washed dishes. "He's distracted, and he's barely around." Michael shrugged, his focus on his studies. "He's probably just stressed. Let's not jump to conclusions." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their father was hiding something. John, however, was too consumed by his growing infatuation with Ella to notice the unease he was causing at home. Ella's charm and beauty became a haven for him, a place where he could escape the responsibilities that had begun to feel like a burden. She made him laugh, made him feel alive. He started buying her small gifts, nothing extravagant at first, just tokens of his growing affection. Ella, emboldened by John's attention, began to push the boundaries. "You're such a good man, John," she said one evening, her hand briefly touching his. "If only more people in my life cared the way you do." Her words fed the void in John's heart. He told himself he was simply helping a young woman in need, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Ella had become his escape, and he wasn't ready to let her go. As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened, and John's distance from his family widened. He didn't see the pain in Mary's eyes or hear the concern in Sarah's voice. He was too far gone, blinded by the allure of a life he thought he could reclaim. But the seeds of deception had been planted, and it was only a matter of time before they would bear bitter fruit. The affair began subtly, but grew bolder with time. John found himself trapped in a web of deceit, his double life spiraling further out of control. He justified every lie he told, convincing himself it was necessary to keep both worlds intact. Yet, the distance between him and his family was becoming harder to ignore. Ella, emboldened by her hold over John, began to test the limits of his generosity. One day, as they sat in a cozy corner of the cafe where they first met, she brought up her financial struggles again, this time with more precision. "John, I hate to ask, but—" Ella hesitated, looking down at her hands as if ashamed. "My tuition deadline is next week. If I can't pay, I'll lose my place at the university." John frowned, conflicted. He was already spending more than he could afford on their secret relationship. His savings were dwindling, and he had barely managed to make the minimum payments on his credit cards. But the thought of letting Ella down gnawed at him. "Can't your family help?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Ella sighed dramatically, her voice tinged with disappointment. "You know, I don't have anyone to rely on. My mom's barely making ends meet, and my dad, well, he's never been in the picture. You're the only one who understands me, John." Her words hit their mark. John felt a surge of pride, the kind that came with being needed. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "Don't worry, Ella, I'll figure something out." At home, Mary was beginning to sense that something was wrong. John's absences were becoming harder to explain, and his mood had shifted. He was distant, distracted, and avoided eye contact during conversations. She tried to bring it up gently one evening as they sat together after dinner. "John," Mary began, her voice soft but probing, "is everything okay? You've been so busy lately, and I feel like I barely see you." John stiffened, avoiding her gaze. "Work has just been overwhelming," he replied quickly. "You know how things are with the economy. I'm doing everything I can to make sure we're secure." Mary nodded, though the unease in her chest didn't subside. She trusted John, but her instincts told her there was more to the story. Meanwhile, Sarah was growing increasingly suspicious. She noticed the subtle changes in her father's behavior, the furtive phone calls, the unexplained late nights, and the way he avoided family discussions. She brought her concerns to Michael, who dismissed them as paranoia. "Sarah, Dad's under a lot of pressure," Michael said, his tone dismissive. "He's just trying to provide for us. Don't overthink it." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their father was hiding something. She started paying closer attention, quietly piecing together clues that only deepened her fears. John, oblivious to the cracks forming at home, was consumed by his plans to help Ella. He decided to sell Mary's car, a decision he justified as a necessary sacrifice. When he brought it up to Mary, he framed it as a business opportunity. "If we sell the car, I can invest the money into a business that will eventually bring in more income," John explained, his tone confident. Mary hesitated. The car was one of their most valuable assets, and losing it would make her life even more challenging. But John's assurance that it was for the family's future swayed her. She reluctantly agreed, unaware of the real reason behind the decision. The car was sold, and the money was handed over to Ella. She played her part perfectly, thanking John profusely and promising to pay him back someday. John, blinded by her gratitude, believed her without question. But as the days passed, the strain of maintaining his double life began to take its toll. The lies became harder to keep track of, and the weight of his choices pressed heavily on him. At home, Mary continued to sew late into the night, unaware that the sacrifices she made were feeding someone else's greed. The foundation of John's family was beginning to crumble, and though he didn't realize it yet, the consequences of his actions were creeping closer with every lie he told. The threads of deceit were tightening, and it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The tension in John's double life was mounting, and the cracks were becoming harder to conceal. At home, Mary began to notice the increasing strain on their finances. The sale of the car, which John had promised would pave the way for a lucrative business venture, had yielded no visible results. Instead, the family found themselves cutting back on necessities. Michael, ever observant, began questioning his father's decisions. "Dad, you said the money from the car would help us get back on track. It's been weeks, and we're still struggling. What's really going on?" John waved off his son's concerns, his voice sharp. "Michael, you don't understand how business works. These things take time. Focus on your studies and leave the rest to me." But Michael wasn't convinced. He shared his doubts with Sarah later that night. "Something's not adding up, Sarah. I've been helping with the bills, but it feels like we're sinking deeper into a hole." Sarah nodded, her voice hesitant. "I've noticed it too, and Dad, he's been acting strange. I overheard him on the phone a few days ago. He sounded different, like he was hiding something. Their conversation was interrupted by Mary, who, despite her disabilities, was attuned to the subtle shifts in her children's moods. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances but decided to keep their suspicions to themselves. "Everything's fine, Mama," Michael said, forcing a smile. "Don't worry about us." While his family grew increasingly wary, John's relationship with Ella was deepening. With the money from the car sale, he had paid off her overdue tuition and even surprised her with a weekend getaway to a luxury resort. Ella reveled in the attention and gifts, her charm tightening its grip on John. "You're amazing, John," she said one evening as they sat by the pool at the resort. "No one's ever cared for me like this." John felt a surge of pride, believing he had finally found someone who appreciated him. He had convinced himself that Ella's happiness justified his actions. Yet, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts he was too afraid to confront. Ella, sensing his occasional hesitation, knew how to keep him hooked. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said, leaning closer, her eyes filled with feigned vulnerability. "You've changed my life, John. I owe you everything." Back home, Mary's suspicions were growing. She confided in Pastor David, who had been a pillar of support for her family over the years. "He's different," she admitted during one of his visits. "Distant. I feel like I'm losing him." Pastor David listened carefully, his brow furrowing. "Marriage goes through seasons, Mary, but trust your instincts. If something feels off, it's worth addressing. Have you spoken to him directly?" "I've tried," Mary replied, her voice trembling. "But he always brushes it off. I'm worried about our family." Pastor David offered her words of comfort, but even he couldn't ignore the unease in his heart. John's recent behavior had not gone unnoticed in the community, and whispers of his interactions with Ella were beginning to circulate. Meanwhile, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. Determined to uncover the truth, she started paying closer attention to her father's movements. One evening, she saw him leaving the house, dressed unusually well for someone claiming to have a work meeting. She followed him, careful to stay out of sight, and watched as he entered an upscale restaurant. Through the large windows, Sarah spotted her father sitting across from a young woman, their body language unmistakably intimate. Her heart sank as realization dawned. The suspicions she and Michael had harbored were true. Their father was leading a double life. Devastated, Sarah returned home and confronted Michael. "I saw him," she said, her voice shaking. "He's with someone else, Michael. He's been lying to all of us." Michael's face darkened, his fists clenching. "We need to confront him. This can't go on." But Sarah hesitated. "What about Mama? This would break her." As the siblings debated their next move, John returned home, oblivious to the storm brewing within his family. He walked past Mary, who was sewing late into the night, and kissed her on the forehead out of habit. She smiled weakly, though the distance between them was palpable. The fragile balance of their family was on the verge of collapse. John's lies were becoming harder to sustain, and the consequences of his actions were closing in. The threads of deception he had so carefully woven were beginning to unravel, and it was only a matter of time before the truth shattered everything. The weight of John's deception was becoming unbearable, even as he continued his double life. His family's needs and the demands of his young lover Ella pulled him in opposite directions. At home, the growing distance between him and his wife, Mary, was now impossible to ignore. Yet, he convinced himself that he could maintain both worlds without either collapsing. Ella, however, was becoming more demanding. Emboldened by John's willingness to sacrifice for her, she began pushing the boundaries further. One afternoon, as they sat in her upscale apartment, the rent for which John had secretly been paying, she leaned in and said, "John, I need your help again. My friends are throwing a baby shower for me, but I can't afford to make it as special as they're expecting. You understand, right?" John stiffened. He hadn't expected her to bring up the baby so casually. While she had insisted the child was his, doubts lingered in his mind. Yet, the thought of losing Ella's affection made him agree. "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. "I'll handle it." At home, Sarah's resentment was growing. She hadn't told her mother about what she had seen, the restaurant, the young woman, the lies her father had been living. But the knowledge ate away at her. Michael, on the other hand, had thrown himself into work and studies, refusing to engage with the situation. "Sarah, we can't do anything about it right now," he said one evening when she pressed him to confront their father. "Mama doesn't need more stress. Let's wait until we're sure what's going on." "But I am sure," Sarah shot back. "He's betraying her, Michael. How can you just stand by and let this happen?" Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because if we confront him and break this family apart, it'll destroy her. She's already been through enough." Meanwhile, Mary's suspicions deepened. She noticed the tension between her children and the late nights her husband spent away from home. Pastor David continued to visit, offering her comfort and advice. "Pray for clarity," he told her one afternoon as they sat on the porch. "And remember, even the strongest storms pass." Unbeknownst to Mary, the storm was growing closer. John had begun taking out loans to fund Ella's increasingly lavish requests. For the baby shower, he booked a luxurious lodge on the outskirts of the city, spending money he didn't have to impress Ella's friends. At the event, Ella's charm was on full display. She laughed and mingled with her guests, while John hovered in the background, unsure of his place in her life. What John didn't know was that Andrew, Ella's true lover and the father of her child, was also at the baby shower, posing as one of her friends. Ella had expertly orchestrated the deception, keeping both men unaware of each other's roles in her life. As the evening wore on, Andrew pulled Ella aside, his voice low and accusing. "How much longer do you plan to keep this up?" Ella smirked. "Relax, Andrew. He's useful, that's all. Once the baby's here, we'll have everything we need." Back at home, Sarah's patience finally snapped. One evening, she cornered her father as he prepared to leave the house. "Where are you going, Dad?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Work," John replied, avoiding her gaze. "You're lying," Sarah said bluntly. "I know about her. I saw you with her." John froze, his mind racing. "You don't understand, Sarah," he began, but she cut him off. "No, Dad, you don't understand. You're breaking this family apart. How can you do this to Mama?" John's face hardened. "Sarah, this isn't your place. You're too young to understand how complicated life can be." "Complicated?" Sarah snapped. "You're destroying everything, and you're too selfish to see it." Their argument was interrupted by Mary, who had overheard the commotion. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "Nothing," John said quickly, brushing past Sarah and heading out the door. Mary watched him leave, her heart sinking. She knew something was deeply wrong, but couldn't bring herself to confront it. The truth was now teetering on the edge of revelation. John's lies, Ella's schemes, and Sarah's determination were all converging, and the fragile balance of their lives was about to shatter. Mary's quiet strength, Michael's simmering anger, and Sarah's resolve would soon collide with the harsh reality John had created. The consequences of his betrayal loomed, ready to consume them all. The baby shower marked the beginning of the end for John's carefully constructed double life. While he had managed to keep his secrets hidden from his family, the financial strain and emotional turmoil were beginning to crack his resolve. Ella, on the other hand, seemed more confident than ever. Her demands increased, her manipulations more calculated, and her true intentions became harder to ignore. At the lodge during the baby shower, John felt increasingly out of place. Ella's friends, a mix of vibrant and carefree personalities, seemed to revel in the luxury he had provided. Yet, their laughter and conversations left him feeling like an outsider. Andrew, her secret lover, moved through the crowd with an ease that John envied. Unbeknownst to him, Andrew had been keeping a closer eye on Ella's relationship with John, growing impatient with her games. "Ella," Andrew whispered to her as they stood in a corner of the lodge. "You're playing with fire. How much longer are you going to keep stringing him along?" Ella smirked, sipping her champagne. "Relax, Andrew. John's too blinded to figure anything out. He's useful, and once the baby arrives, we won't need him anymore." Andrew's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew Ella's charm was a double-edged sword, and while he loved her, he couldn't ignore the trail of destruction she was leaving behind. Meanwhile, at home, Mary's unease grew. She could sense the tension in Sarah, the silence in Michael, and the growing distance in John. She spent her nights sewing late into the hours, praying for strength and clarity. Pastor David's words echoed in her mind, even the strongest storms pass. But this storm felt unrelenting. Sarah, unable to bear her father's betrayal any longer, decided to share her discoveries with Michael. "He's gonna ruin us, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "Mama deserves to know the truth." Michael, ever protective of his mother, hesitated. "And what will it do to her? You think she'll be able to handle it?" "We need to be sure, Sarah." Sarah threw her hands up in frustration. "We've been waiting for weeks. How much more proof do you need?" "He's lying, Michael. To all of us." Michael sighed, his fists clenching. He wanted to confront his father but feared the consequences for their mother, who had endured so much already. They agreed to wait a little longer, though Sarah's patience was wearing thin. As weeks turned into months, Ella's pregnancy neared its end. She insisted on a private hospital for the delivery, a demand that pushed John further into debt. He agreed without hesitation, desperate to keep her happy. On the day of the birth, Ella gave John the news. It was a boy. For a fleeting moment, he felt a surge of pride, though it was tinged with uncertainty. Deep down, doubts about the child's paternity lingered, but he pushed them aside, unwilling to disrupt the fantasy he had built. Ella, ever the actress, played her role perfectly. She let John visit the hospital briefly, where she introduced him to the baby. "Meet your son," she said with a radiant smile, handing the infant to him. John held the child awkwardly, a mixture of emotions washing over him: pride, guilt, and an unshakable sense of foreboding. But behind the scenes, Ella's plans were already in motion. Andrew visited her later that night, cradling the baby with a tenderness that John hadn't shown. "So what's next?" he asked, his voice low. Ella smirked. "We give it a little more time, let him dig himself deeper, then we walk away with everything." At home, John's lies began unraveling. Mary confronted him one evening, her voice firm despite the tremble in her hands. "John, what's going on? I've given you my trust, but you've been distant, different. The children feel it too." John avoided her gaze, muttering excuses about work and financial pressures. But Mary wasn't convinced. Her instincts told her that something was deeply wrong, though she couldn't yet piece it together. Sarah, who had been eavesdropping, decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. "Mama, he's lying," she said, stepping into the room. "I've seen him with someone else." Mary's breath hitched, her hand clutching the edge of the table for support. "What are you saying, Sarah?" John's face darkened. "Sarah, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," Sarah shot back, her voice breaking. "She deserves to know the truth, Dad. You've been with another woman. You've been lying to all of us." The room fell silent as Mary processed the words. Her heart ached, not just from the betrayal, but from the years of trust and love she had poured into her marriage. She turned to John, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it true?" John opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth hung heavy in the air, and in that moment, the fragile balance of their family shattered. Mary's strength, the glue that had held the family together, began to falter. The truth was out, and the consequences of John's choices were about to unfold, with repercussions he could never have imagined. The fallout from Sarah's revelation left the household in disarray. Mary, usually the pillar of strength, withdrew into herself, her silence more telling than any words she could have spoken. Michael, who had tried to shield his mother from the truth, felt a pang of guilt for not intervening sooner, and John, overwhelmed by the weight of his lies, found solace in the only place that remained familiar: Ella. Ella, meanwhile, had become increasingly cold toward John. With her baby born and Andrew firmly by her side, her affection for John turned into indifference. Her once sweet words were now curt, her tone impatient. When John visited her at the apartment he paid for, she greeted him with irritation. "You're late," she snapped, cradling the baby. "Andrew's been helping me more than you have. Maybe I should just rely on him instead." John flinched at her words, but he didn't dare protest. His desperation to cling to her, to salvage the life he thought he had built, outweighed his pride. He handed her an envelope filled with cash, money borrowed against yet another loan. Ella smirked but didn't bother thanking him. She had other plans brewing, and John was no longer a priority. Back at home, the tension between John and his children was palpable. Michael refused to speak to him, barely acknowledging his presence at the dinner table. Sarah, on the other hand, made her contempt clear. "You're a coward," she hissed one evening after John tried to offer an apology. "You destroyed this family for what? A younger woman? A fantasy?" Mary said nothing, her eyes fixed on her hands. The betrayal had cut deep, but her focus remained on her children. She poured her energy into them, determined to keep the family afloat despite John's actions. Pastor David visited often, offering his support and prayers, but even his comforting presence couldn't erase the fracture in the family. Amid the chaos, John received news that his mother had passed away. The funeral was arranged quickly, and the family attended, though the atmosphere was strained. Mary, still processing the betrayal, chose to stay silent, her grief for John's mother mingling with her own pain. Michael and Sarah stood by her side, their gazes avoiding their father. At the funeral, John felt the weight of his choices bearing down on him. As he stood by the grave, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, judged by the family he had betrayed. And then, as if to add insult to injury, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped away from the crowd and checked the message. It was from Ella. "I'm getting married today. Don't contact me again. Andrew and I are starting a new life together with our son. Thanks for everything." John's heart stopped. The words blurred on the screen as tears welled in his eyes. His knees buckled and he sank to the ground, clutching his chest. The raw betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Ella, the woman for whom he had sacrificed everything, had discarded him without a second thought. His sobs drew the attention of the mourners, who assumed he was overcome with grief for his mother. Mary, despite everything, moved toward him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "It's okay to cry," she said softly, mistaking his anguish for mourning. John couldn't bring himself to speak. His tears weren't for his mother, but for the life he had destroyed, the family he had betrayed, and the woman who had used him. As the funeral continued, he sat apart from the crowd, his thoughts spiraling into regret and despair. After the funeral, Mary noticed the change in John. He looked gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his movements sluggish. He no longer left the house for long periods, and the once confident man seemed broken. Despite her pain, Mary felt a twinge of pity for him. She didn't know the full extent of his betrayal, but could see the consequences weighing heavily on him. Meanwhile, Michael decided it was time to take control of the situation. "We can't let him drag us down anymore," he told Sarah one evening. "Mama deserves better. We need to step up and take care of her." Sarah agreed. She threw herself into her studies, determined to secure a scholarship to relieve some of the financial burden. Michael took on extra shifts at work, funneling his earnings into the household. Together, they worked to rebuild what John had torn apart. John, left alone with his thoughts, began to spiral. Ella had vanished, her phone disconnected, and the apartment he had paid for was now empty. The debt collectors started calling, their demands growing more urgent. At 47, John was a shadow of the man he once was, consumed by regret and humiliation. One evening, as he sat in the darkened living room, Mary approached him. Her voice was calm but firm. "I don't know the full story, John, but I know you've hurt this family deeply. I stayed silent because I thought it was best for the children, but I won't let your mistakes destroy us. You need to fix this, if not for me, then for them." John looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Mary," he whispered. "I've failed you. I've failed all of you." Mary's expression softened, but only slightly. "Words won't fix what's broken, John. You need to act. And if you can't, we'll move forward without you." Her words struck a chord, but John knew it was too late to undo the damage. He had burned too many bridges, hurt too many people, and now he was left to face the consequences of his choices. As Mary walked away, he realized that he was no longer the head of the family. The strength he had once taken for granted now rested in the hands of the very people he had betrayed. The days following the funeral were eerily quiet in the household. The fracture John had caused became more evident as the family struggled to piece their lives back together. John withdrew further into himself, his shame and regret rendering him a ghost in his own home. Mary, however, decided she would not let his mistakes define her family's future. Despite her disabilities, Mary resolved to create a better life for her children. For years, she had depended on John's leadership, but now she realized that she would have to step into that role. With Pastor David's encouragement and the support of her children, she began rebuilding their lives. The first step was financial stability. Mary, an expert seamstress, expanded her sewing work. She started with neighbors, offering repairs and custom designs. Word quickly spread, and soon, Mary had a steady stream of clients. With every stitch, she felt a sense of empowerment, a reminder that, even in the face of adversity, she could provide for her family. Michael took on a larger role as well. With his university studies nearly complete, he began working full-time at a logistics firm. His long hours and relentless drive reflected his determination to ensure his mother and sister never had to suffer again. Though the burden was heavy, Michael carried it with pride, knowing he was fulfilling a promise to himself and to his family. Michael took on a larger role as well. With his university studies nearly complete, he began working full-time at a logistics firm. His long hours and relentless drive reflected his determination to ensure his mother and sister never had to suffer again. Though the burden was heavy, Michael carried it with pride, knowing he was fulfilling a promise to himself and to his family. Sarah, inspired by her mother's resilience, threw herself into her education. She excelled in her final exams and earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, a milestone that brought tears to Mary's eyes. "You've made me so proud," Mary said, holding Sarah's hands tightly. "Your father may have faltered, but we are strong. We will rise above this." As the family began to stabilize, John's role diminished. He spent his days in silence, haunted by the consequences of his choices. The debt he had accumulated weighed heavily on him, with creditors constantly calling and letters arriving demanding payments. He was unable to contribute to the household, and the children made no effort to hide their disdain for him. One evening, Sarah confronted him. "Do you even see what you've done, Dad?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger. "Mama's working herself to the bone to fix what you broke. Michael's given up so much to make sure we survive. And what are you doing? Sitting here, feeling sorry for yourself?" John looked at her, tears welling in his eyes. "I know I've failed you, Sarah. I don't have an excuse. I don't even know how to make it right." "You can't," she replied bluntly, "but you can stop being a burden. At least try to help, even if it's too late to fix anything." Her words cut deep, but they sparked something in John. For the first time in months, he realized that his self-pity was only making things worse. That night, he resolved to at least try to earn back his family's respect. The next morning, he visited Mary in her sewing room. She was working on a client's dress, her hands moving deftly over the fabric. "Mary," he began hesitantly, "I want to help. I know I've caused so much pain, but if there's anything I can do, anything at all, please let me." Mary paused, her hands stilling over the fabric. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You want to help?" she asked finally. "Start by taking responsibility. Start by fixing the debts you created. And start by being honest. Not just with me, but with yourself." Her words were blunt but fair, and John nodded. He began seeking small jobs in the neighborhood, doing yard work and handyman repairs. It was humiliating for a man who had once been the head of the household, but he swallowed his pride and worked tirelessly. Slowly, he managed to chip away at the mountain of debt he had accumulated. Meanwhile, Mary's business flourished. Clients admired her skill and determination, often referring others to her. Pastor David helped her secure a spot in the local market, where she could showcase her work to a broader audience. Every sale felt like a victory, a step toward reclaiming her family's stability. Michael's success at his job didn't go unnoticed, and he was promoted within a year. With his increased income, he surprised Mary with a gift she never expected, a new car. "Mama, you gave up your car for this family," he said as he handed her the keys. "It's only right that you have one again." Mary's tears flowed freely as she hugged him. "You've grown into such a fine man, Michael. Your father may have faltered, but you've shown me what strength looks like." Sarah, too, found her footing. At university, she excelled academically and became an advocate for students from underprivileged backgrounds, inspired by her own struggles. Her success was a testament to Mary's sacrifices and the resilience she had instilled in her children. As the months turned into years, the family found a new rhythm. While John remained on the outskirts, he continued to work quietly, repaying his debts and reflecting on the choices that had led him here. He never regained the full trust of his family, but he was determined to spend the rest of his life making amends. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Mary looked around the table. Her children were thriving, their futures bright. Even John, though still broken, had begun to show signs of change. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "God has been good to us," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "We've been through so much, but we've come out stronger, and I couldn't be prouder of this family." Michael and Sarah smiled, their eyes shining with love for the woman who had held them together. And though John remained silent, he knew deep down that Mary's strength had saved them all. As the years passed, the family Mary had worked so hard to rebuild flourished. Michael became a senior manager at a logistics firm. Sarah graduated from university with honors, and Mary's tailoring business grew into a respected brand in their community. Despite the progress, John remained an outsider in his own home. His shame, compounded by years of guilt, made it difficult for him to engage with his children, who still harbored resentment toward him. John, now in his late 50s, had visibly aged. His once commanding presence had diminished, replaced by a frail frame and weary eyes. Though he worked odd jobs to pay off his debts, he struggled to regain his family's trust. Despite his efforts, the damage he had done felt irreparable. He watched from the sidelines as Michael and Sarah thrived, and as Mary became a beacon of strength in the community. One evening, Michael called a family meeting. His tone was serious, and even John, who had grown accustomed to being ignored, was included. They gathered in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. "We need to talk," Michael began, his voice calm but firm, "about everything." Mary sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, while Sarah crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on their father. John shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of what was coming. "For years, we've avoided this conversation," Michael continued. "But it's time we address what happened and what it's done to this family." John swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "Michael, No," Michael interrupted. "You need to listen. For once, just listen." The room fell silent, and Michael's words came slowly, deliberate and piercing. "We've come a long way since everything fell apart. Mama worked tirelessly to hold us together. Sarah and I sacrificed to make sure we survived, and somehow we've made it. But you..." He paused, his voice shaking with anger. "You brought us to the brink of ruin." John's shoulders slumped as Michael's words struck him like blows. "I know," he whispered. "I know I failed you all." Sarah's voice broke the silence, sharp and filled with years of pent-up emotion. "Failed? You didn't just fail us. You betrayed us. You betrayed Mama. Do you even understand what you did to her?" John's eyes filled with tears, and he struggled to find his voice. "I do. I've lived with that every day. I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to make amends." "Amends?" Sarah shot back, her voice rising. "Do you think working a few odd jobs and paying off debts erases what you did? Mama gave up everything for this family, and you threw it away for someone who didn't even care about you." Mary, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of years of wisdom. "That's enough, Sarah. Let him speak." Sarah sat back, her arms still crossed, but her expression softened slightly. John took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he began. "You're right. I betrayed all of you. I let my selfishness destroy what we had, and I hurt the people who loved me most. I've spent years trying to fix what I broke, but I know I can never fully repair the damage." He turned to Mary, his eyes brimming with tears. "Mary, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve anything from this family. But I need you to know that I regret everything. Every decision, every lie, it haunts me every day." Mary's gaze softened, though her expression remained stern. "John, regret is not enough, it never has been. But I see that you're trying, and that matters. It doesn't erase the pain, but it's a start." John nodded, grateful for her words, even if they didn't absolve him. He turned to his children, his voice breaking. "Michael, Sarah, I know I can't fix the past, but I want to be part of your future. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, please let me." Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah, his expression conflicted. "It's not that simple, Dad," he said. "You've hurt us deeply, and trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. But if you're serious about making amends, it starts with showing us that you've changed, not just with words, but with actions." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "And it means being honest. No more lies, no more hiding. John nodded, his voice barely audible. I'll do whatever it takes. The meeting ended on a tentative note, with no clear resolution, but a glimmer of hope. For the first time in years, John felt that he had a chance to reconnect with his family, even if the road ahead was long and uncertain. Over the following months, John worked tirelessly to prove himself. He took on more responsibility at home, helping Mary with her business and supporting Michael and Sarah in their endeavors. Slowly, the walls between him and his children began to crack, though they remained cautious. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, a rare occurrence in recent years, Mary raised her glass. To us, she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. We've been through so much, but we're still here, and for that, I'm grateful. Michael and Sarah exchanged a glance, then raised their glasses. Even John, tentative and unsure, joined in. For the first time in years, the family felt a sense of unity, fragile but real. Though the scars of the past remained, there was a renewed sense of hope. The journey was far from over, but for Mary, Michael, Sarah, and even John, the first steps toward healing had finally begun. Time moved forward, but the echoes of the past lingered in the lives of Mary and her family. John, now humbled by his years of regret and failure, continued working tirelessly to prove himself. He was no longer the man who had abandoned his family for fleeting pleasures. He was a man trying to rebuild something he had shattered. Michael, Sarah, and Mary watched his efforts cautiously. While they appreciated his visible attempts to contribute, whether it was fixing things around the house or assisting Mary with her growing tailoring business, there was still a gap that couldn't be bridged by effort alone. Trust was something John would have to earn, and even then, the scars of his betrayal would remain. One day, Michael invited John to join him for a business event. It was a small gesture, but one that symbolized a significant step forward. As they drove to the event, Michael finally addressed the tension that had lingered between them for years. "You know, Dad," Michael began, his voice calm but firm, "when you left us emotionally and practically, it was hard to respect you. You were my role model growing up, and then you became a stranger. I never thought I'd be sitting here with you, trying to mend things." John nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "I can't change what I did, Michael, but I promise, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Michael glanced at his father, noting the sincerity in his expression. "It's not just about making up for it, Dad. It's about showing us that you're here for the long haul. Words are easy, actions matter." Their conversation marked a turning point. While there was still work to be done, Michael's guarded walls began to lower slightly, giving John a sliver of hope that reconciliation was possible. Meanwhile, Sarah had thrown herself into her career as a teacher. She loved working with underprivileged children, many of whom reminded her of her own struggles. Her relationship with her father remained strained, but she found herself softening toward him in moments when his efforts seemed genuine. One evening, as she visited Mary to help with the household chores, she saw John fixing the broken sewing machine. "Need help with that?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with the offer. John looked up, startled but grateful. "If you don't mind," he replied. Together, they worked on the machine, the silence between them less tense than it had been in years. While they didn't exchange many words, the quiet cooperation was a small but significant step toward rebuilding their relationship. Mary watched these moments unfold with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had spent years holding the family together, and now she could see the beginnings of healing. Pastor David, who remained a close confidant, reminded her that forgiveness was a process, not a single moment. "You've done well, Mary," he told her one afternoon. "Your strength has been the foundation for this family, and it's inspiring to see how far you've come." The family continued to grow stronger, though the shadows of the past never fully disappeared. John worked harder than ever, not just to pay off his debts, but to rebuild his place in the family. He knew he would never fully erase the pain he had caused, but he also knew that his efforts were starting to matter. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Mary made an announcement. "I've decided to expand the business," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll open a small shop in the market. I've already secured a location." Michael and Sarah beamed with pride, while John looked at her with admiration. "You've built something incredible, Mary," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." Mary smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, John. But this isn't just my victory. It's all of ours." As the evening wore on, the family shared stories and laughter, the atmosphere lighter than it had been in years. While there was still a long way to go, the bonds they had fought to rebuild were slowly becoming stronger. For John, the dinner was a reminder of what he had lost, and what he was lucky to still have. His mistakes had been monumental, but his family's resilience had shown him the true meaning of love and forgiveness. Though he knew he would never fully atone for his past, he resolved to spend the rest of his days ensuring that his actions reflected the lessons he had learned. In the end, Mary's triumph wasn't just in rebuilding her family's stability, it was in showing them, and John, that even in the face of betrayal and pain, strength, love, and forgiveness could create a path forward. The journey wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and they embraced it together.